Let's do something new since spring football was new this last few months here. We're going to do our first ever top 25. JB, what do you think? You've seen the results. What's your thoughts here?
I actually feel pretty good about it. I mean, I know you've been a top 25 voter with D3Football.com for years and years, but it was really fun to try to take what's ultimately kind of an incomplete data set and merge it all together in the spreadsheet, kind of crunching numbers like we did in law or grad school. But, it was a fun process, and I think the results are actually ones that I can live with. I think it came out about as well as it could have.
We'll explain how this all worked. We'll have some actual student athletes on the show as well. You'll see what we mean. Stay tuned for the next about 45 minutes or so. This is In the Huddle's Top 25 in Season 13. Okay, let's get to the methodology real quick here. We'll break this down, and we kind of hinted to it last time we were with you last week that we are basically using teams that finish 500 or better as the benchmark here. That is teams that play 2 or more games that were at least 500 in their record, and those were the comparisons we used. We had over 100 teams play in Division III at least one game. However, 59 of those teams qualified for that criteria that we just mentioned there. On top of that, what we did was we had a computer ranking and we had us. And basically, we were the eye test, as you may have heard us refer to before, which is kind of that subjective, boy, that team may not have played as many games, but we know a lot about that team and those players. And, based on some history and, showing through, they did pretty well, and they should be better probably than maybe what the computer says. But we actually did our ballots before we saw the computer ranking, so there was no post-fixing going on in this whole thing. The computer rankings came down to wins, losses, quality losses in cases where you maybe had a conference championship game or something like that occurred. Then we also had stats for total offense, total defense, point differential, and turnover ratio. Numbers that we've cited before in playoffs that we think are important to the context of, comparing team to team ultimately. So those computer rankings gave us some interesting results. Sometimes we looked at it and said, wow, I wouldn't have expected that, but it came out for a good reason. And we're going to see probably right off the bat one of those situations. Later in the show, we'll have what we've called In Their Own Words. This last time we did this was the accidental cancellation of their football program, and had some student athletes send us videos in to give us their thoughts in their own words. We're going to talk about just spring football in their own words, why they were thankful for that happening. We've got a good number of student athletes that did send in videos we want to present. We'll break up the monotony a little bit later on in the show. Any thoughts before we jump in here to number 25?
Well, just to be clear, because I know that there were some fans out there that are going to be mad that their team isn't on the list. And trust me, like Whitewater fans, if you guys played, you'd probably be in the top of this list. But, your school, your conference canceled the spring season too. So, we're pretty sure we'll start seeing you in the preseason polls up where you're used to being, especially after coming off a national runner-up type of season. But so just to be clear, this is just the teams that played this spring season. So hopefully there's no more confusion, and we could just jump right in and see what happens.
This was the spring 2021 top 25, not the preseason fall 2021 top 25. We may do one of those too. Remember, regions change. We add 2 regions, we split the teams differently across the country, and that means it's going to have an effect on our show. And we're still determining what that all means and who we'll be covering more closely in the fall as well. So stay tuned for that. We're not calling this the end of Season 13 for us. We are going to probably do a little more content under the banner of Season 13 over the next month or two as we lead up to Season 14 for In the Huddle. Season 13 was a season unlike any other for sure. The fact we're even doing this should tell you that. I have pages upon pages of information. Let's go. Our first team that we'll name here, number 25, it's going to be a little controversial for some people. It's Huntingdon. It's kind of fitting after the last few weeks of shows that we did and whatnot with Brevard and all that stuff that Huntingdon is number 25. You can see the results there, the Brevard series at the beginning of the season for them and their wins against Maryville and Methodist. The thing to take note of, and I'm going to point this out, the point differential for Huntingdon per game is the only team in the top 25 with a negative point differential. And, you know, I will tell you in places where JB and I said one thing and the computer said something entirely different, we did not dog Huntingdon much in our polls. I think I had them right below Brevard. I think you had them a couple spots below Brevard. The computer basically said, look, this data compared to the other 58 teams that were in comparison, and we tiered them. We didn't do, let's say, number 1, number 2, number 3 down to number 59. We did tiering approach. The tiered approach said Huntington's numbers did not really check well. So in the overall balance between what we did and what the computer did, they're at number 25. Remember that talk about the eye test or the look at the entire body of work that Brevard had suggested to us? Well, the computer kind of did that here, JB, and that's why they land at 25, but still a good season for Huntingdon. Obviously, they're recognized by the USA South as champions. We chose not to do that for various reasons we will not get into right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, clearly when you look at them, they did beat Brevard once, but then they lost to them in a pretty lopsided fashion. They got the win against Methodist through that sort of coin toss scenario. But still, hey, I mean, they're in the top 25, which, considering how many teams played, says a lot. They had a great season, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about the Hawks come the fall.
Let's go to the only team in our batch that had 2 losses. I guess maybe that gives away a little bit to certain folks watching here, but it's important to distinguish that while wins and losses did not determine everything, obviously with a small sample size across the board, it decided some of this. And here's one that bucked the trend to a certain degree. That's ETBU, East Texas Baptist, in at number 24. The game that really stood out for a lot of people had to be the UMHB game, where they probably should have won that game in some ways. They had the opportunities, but the fact that they even challenged was an important thing there. And it was kind of a tale of 2 seasons. They kind of bookended the 2 losses with some nice big wins against a very capable Belhaven team and Texas Lutheran in the crossover games. And they had some great stats overall, except the turnover margin kind of was a bugaboo for them. But everything else looked okay on their resume. I know you're a fan of how they did this season.
Yeah, and basically I think those 2 losses were really the games where they struggled with turnovers, and that's why you see that pretty high number in the turnover margin there. But the fact that they, like you said, Frank, they probably should have beaten the ASC champs head-to-head was pretty impressive, and that was enough for me anyway to have them in my top 25, and I think that's partially why they ended up on the combined list.
Let's move to number 23, Albion, with their 3-0 record. Kind of one of those teams that kind of flew under the radar nationally because we weren't talking much about the MIAA this season, especially as Trine had lost their first game, which was that season opener for Albion. Trine was one of our tri-national champions from the fall. And remember, we should include that, although I don't know if it affected anything here, these are rankings based only on spring games, only on the spring games, not on the fall games that we've already taken into account for other purposes. So Albion, great offense, 463 yards per game, and the point differential being a plus 18. Turnover margin a little bit low for a 3-win team, but that means their offense was able to overcome it to a certain degree. They are kind of the best of breed in the MIAA, which did not play a full slate of games to the degree that we thought they might compared to what they were trying to do in the fall. But still, Albion, a strong last month and a half or so that we saw them play football.
Yeah, absolutely. And with their quarterback, I think it was either Jack or Jake Bush. Great arm, can run. That offense was really clicking, and 400 and 63 yards per game. That's going to be one of the highest numbers that you'll see on this list. There are some that broke 500, but real impressive team in the Britons, and certainly deserving.
Here's one of those controversial moments. You won't be able to tell exactly what I mean right off the bat, but I'll flag it for folks so that you understand what may have happened when you see the other part of this later. Number 22 is Aurora, and the Spartans come in at number 22. Some folks might be a little bit surprised that they're this low. Gavin Zimbelman and company went 3-0. There was no championship in the NACC because it was canceled ultimately. They were supposed to face Lakeland, and it would have been a very decisive game for us in terms of the rankings. Without that game, we have to go on what's in front of us. And what's in front of us was a very imbalanced set of 3 games by Aurora and a turnover margin in just 3 games of -6. That did not help matters for this team. Their point differential was strong because of that one route at the beginning of the season, actually the first 2 games when you really look at it. But when the long story short comes here, Aurora is a good team that almost beat St. John's in the playoffs a couple of years ago with Zimbelman at the helm, but a team that needs to be more consistent on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that -6, second lowest turnover margin, I think, as far as we have on our list. And so, yeah, well, I feel like, if Aurora and Lakeland had played, that obviously could have moved them well up the list if they had won that and effectively gone 4-0. But, like you said, a little inconsistency, and that kind of dinged them on the computer side.
Yeah, this was another case where I think our votes went over and above what the computer fed back to us, and so we end up counterbalancing in a way that puts them in the top 25 at least because they deserve to be there. But look, I think those numbers don't mislead you. We remember that Benedictine game where things were kind of...
They barely won.
Yeah, they took kind of the quasi-onside kick scenario, Don Beebe calling that for 2 straight weeks, but that second week of it, it was necessary. They almost did not win that game. And so consistency, that's what they're going to have to work on in fall 2021. And again, that's why we use spring at all. Spring 2021 gave us an idea of who we are as a team and as players, what a roster looks like, what we need, what we have, all those things. A lot of teams we'll be talking about, I think, learned a lot about themselves this short season. Let's go to number 21. Only 2 games in for Carthage. The 2-0 Firebirds now, no longer the Redmen, but the Firebirds. They changed their mascot in the last few months, actually, I think it was. Look at their total offense, kind of low compared to most teams, under 300 yards per game, but their total defense under 270, and a good point differential there, and turnover margin in just 2 games is a +3. So Carthage, for a CCIW team, flying under the radar because of not having those defending national champions playing this season in North Central, but the CCIW is a good conference with good teams in it, and this is one of those really scenarios where the computer sort of balanced with us on this one. It agreed with what was in front of it, but we sort of rubber stamped the situation and said, yeah, Carthage is a good team. They deserve to be in this, number 21.
Yeah, the Firebirds definitely, I think, typically have been sort of a 500 kind of middle of the pack CCIW team. But the reality is the CCIW is so strong that a 500 team from that conference would beat most of the other 59 teams on the overall list. So let's be realistic. I mean, there's probably some further up in the top 15 where that may not be the case. But a very strong conference ranking, I think, helped boost them up a little bit.
Yep, indeed. And I think that's where our eye test kind of came into in some of these, because we know what the conferences they play in. The computer does not. The computer doesn't have the ability to balance it unless we fed more data in. So again, this is why we do this balance the way we did it. The computer has some good thoughts. We had some good thoughts, I think, as well with some of these teams. For instance, DePaul. I believe it was Jim Catanzaro, Coach Cat from Lake Forest, who came on the show, and you asked him about a scenario like this, a top 25, and teams that he thought were deserving. I believe DePaul was one of the top on his list, that if they got to play more, we would have seen them probably in a top 10 scenario. That what they did do on the field, we thought was worthy of number 20. And almost 400 yards a game offensively. Defense probably need a little bit more control to maybe get them a little bit higher, but the point differential plus 24 and a turnover margin plus 3 in 2 games, that's good stuff. And DePaul deserves, I believe, to be on here in this list. It's the only NCAC team really that had a resume worth or able to be showing on this list, and DePaul is your number 20 team as a result. I know you and I maybe had a little disagreement on this, but I think Kat's points were pretty cogent about this a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and I think he alluded to the fact of something like a 29 or 30 person senior class as being part of that reasoning, because there aren't that many of those out there anymore. So sounds like they're going to be a pretty loaded team coming back in the fall. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about DePaul real soon.
Let's move to number 19, and our first NJAC team of at least maybe 2, maybe 3. I'm going to let you sit and wait that one out, folks. But the Montclair State Redhawks, the computer did some good liking of this team. So did our human rankings as well. Montclair we knew was a strong team. That Wesley ending was a little bit screwy, we'll call it that, but they probably should have won that game, and if they had, they probably would have been near top 10 material, if not in the top 10. But still, with the Kane win, the 7-point Wesley loss, and the rout of William Patterson, their defense was what really highlights things, although Jaquil Birch might argue with that a little bit. He had a decent season, indeed. It just wasn't in yardage figures. And the turnover margin of plus 4 is decent, to say the least, although over 3 games it averages out a little bit less than, let's say, DePaul. But this is one of those eye tests with the conference. You know the NJAC's a good conference. The teams that played or that they played are good teams, maybe not the greatest of the NJAC teams on that list, but still, Montclair has some great support throughout their cast on both sides of the ball, and they deserve to be the number 19 team at 2-1.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we saw how close Salisbury and Wesley's game was, only 2 points there, and to only come up, by a touchdown short, and maybe should have had an extra play or two in that game, which could have changed the outcome. So, definitely in the thick of it, and so congrats to the Red Hawks on their North Division championship. Which was something we initially were going to factor in, but we sort of took some of the division stuff out of it. It was kind of clouding the data to a certain extent. But still, from the eye test, I definitely feel like Montclair is a team that belongs in the list.
Time for some safety, or 4 safeties perhaps, as number 18 is Lake Forest. There's only 2 of us. We need 2 more co-hosts. We should have gotten Trench Talk to help us out. But Lake Forest in at number 18. And I'm going to throw you right down to a stat that absolutely stuck out to us. Total defense was good at 242, no doubt. But go 2 lines below that. Turnover margin in just 3 games at a plus 6. This defense was a bunch of ball hawks for Lake Forest in the games they played. And so, Greenville, which was a common opponent with DePaul, maybe DePaul deserved to be above Lake Forest, and if they played a third game, maybe DePaul would have been above Lake Forest, to be honest with you. But they both handled Greenville pretty well. But Lake Forest seemed to trip up a little bit against Illinois College, but was able to get back in that game because of that defense and their special teams, for that matter. And the Ripon game wasn't really even close when he really got down to it. Seemed like they were hitting a good stride at the end of this spring, and that's the type of momentum you want to see from a team when we're just 3 months away from the fall, essentially, when they play their last game, maybe 4 months away from their first kickoff, technically, but 3 months away from preseason. Cat's got to be happy, and I have to assume he thinks that number 18 is a fair number for his team.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, a combination of the results plus the competition that they played, and obviously Coach Cat was one of the most outspoken coaches in the fall and the spring about getting games in. And so I'm sure, although he would have probably liked to have that fourth game against Knox, which I'm guessing they would have won and made them 4-0, 3-0 spring season, nothing to be upset about. It was definitely, team looks good, and they're heading into the fall looking strong.
Number 17, bittersweet to say the least right now. Another NJAC team here. Wesley Wolverines. We're going to say it right now because I think the timing is right. Ultimately, we have, for the last 2 seasons, named Coach of the Year, Coach of the Region, really. The first year was Jeff Behrman from Union in 2019. In 2020, Coach of the Year across the nation was Mike Toop for his dedication and ability to get the game off the ground and win it against Coast Guard. Chip Knapp is our 2021 Spring Coach of the Year here in the Huddle. And to think of the job he had to do to get this team even to be able to field the team because of the announcements, because of what happened with Wesley generally, it was no small task. And whoever hires him is going to be very, very fortunate down the line here. They didn't have a kicker in their first game against Salisbury. The 2-1 record is because of that close loss. If they had a kicker in that game, they might have won it or gotten to overtime. If you do the math back and forth, it was possible.
Yeah.
But the point here is to even field the team. This was not your normal strength Wesley team. Shamir Vessels had already left for Del Val, so one of their best players is already gone. I mean, against all odds, they finish here in a way that puts them at number 17 legitimately. And like I said, Chip Knapp, our Coach of the Year. I know you are Coach of the Season, I guess we should call it, at least in this situation. But I know you're a big fan of Coach Knapp. What are your thoughts here as we close the book on Wesley?
Yeah, well, it's just been an amazing run for this program for the last 20, 30 seasons. Obviously, Coach Drass and Coach Knapp were the kind of the Batman and Robin of D3 football there for a while. Just great teammates, coordinators, and teachers, and whether it was on our show or Pat's, kind of Wesley's. Like the voicemails from former players, just a lot of great seasons, a lot of great football, a lot of great memories for Wesley, and we'll miss him.
Indeed, we will. Let's move on. We don't want to dwell too much here. Obviously, there's a lot more to be said and written about this whole situation with Wesley. We'll do that another time. Number 16 is the only team whose mascot is a fish, I believe. So if you have a fish as your mascot, I'm sorry. You might want to turn off the show at this point. How many teams do we have with fish as mascots? I really don't think we have too many out there. Anyway, Lakeland, the Muskies, are number 16. Now, here's that separation. Yeah, reel it in. They didn't reel in Aurora in terms of being right next to them, despite the fact that they're co-NACC champs because of that lack of a game we talked about earlier. 3-0. Look at their offensive and defensive numbers, though. 475 plus, defense 240 minus, the point differential plus 28.4, turnover margin only basically plus 1 per game, plus 3 overall. But their numbers, the computer basically threw them into a top tier area. We rebalanced that with our votes, I think, ultimately. But JB, I mean, Lakeland, a team that maybe a lot of people don't think is that caliber team, and the NACC, we understand, isn't necessarily that caliber conference in a lot of people's minds, but they looked really good.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are hard to put down, and so without that deciding game between Aurora, they do come out on top in certain ways. Maybe moved up a little higher than they could or should have, and there's going to be other teams that we're going to talk about that, but just sort of where it fell, and still a 3-0 record, and the wins that they had and the numbers they had certainly got them to that spot.
So we're going to take a little break here. We're droning on and on here. We've gotten down 10 teams. We got 15 to go here in our top 25 of spring 2021. But a lot of players wanted to tell us their feelings about spring football, about why they're thankful it was played. There's still this open question about what level of spring football we're going to see in the future, be it practices with pads, spring games, or whatnot. And let's just hear from some of the players. I think we have representation from Westminster, Hendricks, Montclair, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody here.
Salisbury.
Thank you. I knew I forgot somebody here.
Salisbury.
Yep, Salisbury as well. So we thank our SIDs from all those schools for helping us out with that. But in their own words about spring football.
Not being able to play in the fall made me really grateful and really appreciate still being able to play the game of football. That made playing this spring even better. It felt amazing to get back out there competing after not playing a game for so long. It is always a good feeling to be practicing, but to be able to play a game and go out and compete against another team is always a better feeling. Although there were no national playoffs this spring, it was good to know that we were playing for something and playing for a conference championship at the end of this.
Hello, my name is Tajay White, junior wide receiver at Hendricks Football. And what playing in the spring meant to me was everything. In the game of football, you never know when that next game will be your last. And especially this year, in COVID, games got canceled a lot. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity that the SAA offered us to not only play those 5 games, but to also play in the conference championship.
Hello, my name is Bryce Thomas, and I'm a junior safety for the Westminster College Titans. And being able to play ball this spring was definitely a blessing. I mean, after coming back in the fall and learning that we weren't going to get a chance to play in the fall, then coming back in the winter and still not knowing if we were going to get a chance to play in the spring, it was definitely a blessing to learn that we were actually going to get a chance to play. After all the practices and after all the just going through everything in classes and stuff, being able to play was definitely a relief. I mean, I got a chance to go back out there and compete with my brothers, and as a team, we were able to accomplish something that's never been done here in our school history and win a conference championship. And I feel like it gave us momentum into going into next year. So, spring ball was definitely a blessing, and I'm glad we were able to have it.
For us, getting to play in the spring just meant that we would be together again, and I think that's what most of the team wanted. We wanted to be around the team and be around our coaches again, and most importantly, it meant that we could send our seniors out on a good note. When we heard that we could play in the spring, that there would be a championship, we made a goal that we wanted to be our best and play our best and give our seniors a champion's exit.
What's up, guys? First, I want to say thank you for all the coverage this year. You guys do an incredible job promoting D3 football. And in terms of being able to play this spring, for myself, it was kind of a blessing in disguise coming off the torn ACL in the ECAC Bowl at the end of 2019. So I was just glad to be able to play at full health. And then for the team, I think that sentiment was shared. Knowing how hard we were working this summer and in fall practice, with all the uncertainty going on with the pandemic, we just knew that any opportunity we got, we want to make the most of it and just cherish the opportunity to compete and be around each other. So, yeah, thank you.
I'm Maceo Matthews Jr. from Heidelberg University, and I'm thankful for the spring season because it gave everyone an opportunity to play and grow as a team. Thank you.
Being able to play this spring was a truly awesome experience. It felt like forever since I was out there with my teammates and playing real football games. I really enjoyed it. I was really happy for our seniors that won't be with us next year, that they were able to go out and play their final games of college football. I think overall as a team, I think it gave freshmen a great experience of what college football is all about, and as well as everyone else, it let us know what we need to get better at and what we need to improve on this summer coming up for our fall of 2021 season. So playing in the spring, honestly, was just being able to play even 2 games was just a great experience. I'm really thankful for it, and I'm glad that it happened. And I'm looking forward to our season this fall. Go Goals!
Hi, I'm Nick Kofer, senior at Heidelberg University, and I'm thankful for the spring season because it gave me personally and the team an extra 5 opportunities to grow and to go into the fall championship season.
To get to play this spring season truly meant everything to me. I think it meant everything to this team as well. With all the uncertainty after the fall season getting canceled, it was finally a relief to get out there and play some games, to get to play the sport we all love. We showed up in the fall, not knowing when and if we would play in the spring, but we practiced hard, and I think we got the work done that we needed to, and I think it all ultimately showed in the spring that we truly were prepared and ready to go. For me personally, after 17 years of football, to get to end my career in my senior year as a PAC champion is an amazing feeling and something I'll truly never forget. I also want to thank the conference, the coaches, the athletic directors, the trainers, everybody behind the scenes that took the time and effort to make this happen and to make it the best experience we possibly could have. And it's something for me I'll never forget and something that I will carry with me forever.
Thanks again to those student athletes for taking out the time for those comments and thoughts. We do appreciate that. Good cross-section of teams across D3 Nation there. Let's get back to our top 15 teams here. We'll give a little bit more discussion about some of these as we go into our higher list. We'll also go through all 25 at the end of this in case you missed our first 10 or don't want to rewind at this point. Let's go to number 15. And here's that controversy, part 2 of what we talked about in number 25 with Huntingdon. Number 15, the Brevard Tornadoes. We know the minefield we're walking into here by having this separation. But again, Brevard's numbers, when we looked at the turnover margin for Huntingdon and the point differential, and then you look at Brevard, you can see why the computer treated these teams so much differently. The extra win obviously didn't hurt things for Brevard. And technically should have canceled the coin toss, but we won't go there. Or did I? But, they start with the Huntingdon loss, and then it was up, and away from there. And obviously more than rebalanced that loss the second time around. Tornadoes, great leadership on both sides of the ball. Their defense obviously was a highlight quite often this season. You wonder what happened in that first game of the season, why they didn't respond as well as they did the rest of the season. I mean, they gave up, 30 points in the last 4 games and 26 points in the first game of the season. But Brevard bounces back well and becomes number 15. Hats off to them, a team that really is becoming a household name in Division III for good reasons now.
Yeah, and you'll also see, maybe not at the moment, but once all this is said and done, but the 225 on the total defense is going to be one of the better numbers that we came across, at least in the tabulation of all the statistics. So awesome job by the Tornadoes. I know they've had some challenges with injuries to their quarterbacks, but they found ways to keep winning games with backups and third string guys or converted tight ends. So a lot of credit to that coaching staff for getting this young program up and running pretty fast. And I'm sure like we said, right over your shoulder there, Frank. We'll be seeing more of the Tornadoes over the next few years.
Thanks again to Brevard for the wonderful helmet here. And also thanks to Norwich for sending some great swag our way this week.
Yeah.
We showcased on Twitter. I don't know if you folks saw it, but we'll be showing a lot more of that. Like I said, we're going to be redoing the background here on my set. Maybe yours too. We'll see with all the stuff you've got coming your way for season 14. Let's continue here. Speaking of 14, how apropos. Number 14 in our rankings, the Hendricks Warriors. Here's a team that maybe I feel like should be in closer to a top 10 team. But then, you look at some of the stats and you say maybe this is why they didn't rank as well as I thought they would have with only the 1-point loss to Barry in the SAA title game. Total offense 388 can be a little bit pedestrian compared to some of these teams with 400 plus that we've seen, so they didn't tear out tremendously well. The point differential was pretty low compared to most teams we're looking at as we continue here at plus 9.3, and the turnover margin at plus 1 didn't help much either. But still, Hendricks is a very good team in a very deep SAA conference. They weren't just fun to watch, that conference. You could tell they have a lot of talent that maybe we didn't appreciate fully because we hadn't gotten a chance to really concentrate on that conference until we did see them almost showcase themselves weekly on a national stage, basically, this spring.
Yeah, and I think Hendricks also fell into a similar situation as Huntington. Playing a lot of these close, low-scoring games just didn't. The robots don't like that for some reason. So, but the Warriors had a fine season, and I think those guys down in Conway will be more than happy to call themselves a top 15 team from this spring.
Let's go to number 13, and here was an interesting thing. The conference that's going to end up, I think, happiest with how things worked out here is going to be the ODAC, and you'll see why as we move through this. First off, number 13, Hampton-Sydney, the team that probably should have done a lot better than they did against Randolph-Macon in that 28-0 game, but the rest of their season, 21-0, 26-0, 43-12, 49-21. Yeah, absolutely. The defense, 236.8, point differential, 15.6, turnover margin, +6 in those 5 games, including the loss. And whenever you see a loss, you got to assume they lost the turnover battle in most cases in that situation. So despite that, they still were at a +6. So Hampton-Sydney is kind of that tale of two teams. One game doesn't necessarily define who you are. This is where I think our eye test helped them a little bit, but the stats obviously buoyed them to a certain degree here. And playing 5 games in a season didn't hurt because it sort of justified the positioning. It gave us enough of a sample set to say, they're good. Okay, it wasn't like they were 1-1 where we're like, oh, I don't know who the real Hampton-Sydney is. Here you've got 4-1 against decent teams in the ODAC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you look at their total defensive numbers, once again, anything kind of in that 225 to 230 range is really strong. And the point differential is very solid. So yeah, this HSC team definitely had a great season, and good to see him as high as 13.
Let's talk about, we just talked about our first ODAC team. Let's talk about our last NJAC team that's going to be in these rankings. And you saw Jack Lanham in their own words segment just a little bit ago talking about spring football. And there's a reason why he was probably happy about it, because his team got to finish here number 12. This is a case where only having 2 games didn't necessarily help Salisbury. And the computer spit back some odd numbers with them, but our rankings kind of embraced who we knew they were ultimately. And so the counterbalance, I think, did actually the right thing here, putting Salisbury at number 12. The 2 games were obviously the 2-point win against Wesley and the 25-point win against Christopher Newport. The total offense and total defense didn't help them. Let's just be clear about that. Both are in the lower 300 to middle 300 range and not in the right spots necessarily. The point differential at least was plus 13.5. The turnover margin at 0. Again, this is where the computer basically looks at it and says, we got some better teams over here, at least statistically. And that's where we say that may be true, but they are in a good conference, play good teams, and they are a very good, experienced team, obviously based on their 2019 playoff performance. So, again, this is where I think I'm happy to see where they landed, because I think it's justified. Going into the top 10 might have been a little bit too high for what they showed, but putting them into, let's say, below 15, I wouldn't have agreed with that either.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, what the computer sort of initially was trying to do. And so we had to kind of counterbalance that with the experience that we have with covering these guys. Like, this was an Elite 8 team in 2019, and they didn't lose a whole lot to graduation, and they'll be one of the best teams in what I guess is Region 2 this fall. It's not the East or the South or whatever. No, it's just 2. Region 2. Okay, we'll talk about that some other time, but definitely a strong Salisbury team as always, and certainly deserves to be up there.
Time to go to kind of another bittersweet moment here. From number 12, we go to a number 11 team, and the photo we chose, obviously, for a reason, as the jersey of number 49 being held by the team of Heidelberg. The Curtis Hellman story we covered pretty deeply, and the loss still affects the Heidelberg Student Princes in ways that we can't describe. And talking to Coach Donaldson and whatnot, we know it still is very, very prevalent on their minds. But getting to celebrate the OAC West Championship before their game against Mount Union obviously didn't go the way they wanted it to. It was one of those highs and lows seasons for this team that, you look at their numbers, they scored some points. This team has a good future. Drew Sims and company, this is going to be an interesting team. Maceo Matthews, who you saw in their own words earlier, this is a good team. Are they Mount Union good? Obviously not yet. We saw that in the championship, but 499.4 in the offensive category. Their defense needs to sort of tamp down the yardage they're giving up, obviously, and their turnover margin needs to get on the right side of things. But again, that Mount Union game skewed some of these stats in a way that threw everything off. And again, we try not to define teams by one game. Does it push them out of the top 10? Yeah, it does. Okay, we get that. But
sure,
Heidelberg, I think, fell to where they should have fallen based on it. Number 11 is a number that I think is fitting, again, for a team that had the offense they had and the weapons they had throughout the season and had overcome what they overcame just a couple weeks into this season.
Yeah, and basically 500 yards a game is going to end up being something like the top 5 or 6 best offense in the spring nation season. So certainly that Mount Union game, probably, if we took that out of the equation, the numbers would look a lot better. It was just one of those games where things just got off to a bad start and just kind of kept going downhill. So, that I don't think that should be held too much against them, especially with a program as storied as Mount Union. But it was great to see the Student Princes overcome a ton of adversity, and I'm sure that they're looking forward to getting back at it in the fall.
Indeed. Time for the top 10. If you haven't heard your name yet and you think you're a team that deserve to be in this list, you're probably coming up right now here in our top 10 of 2021 spring season in Division III college football. Number 10 was a challenge for our top line banner to make sure it could fit without having to abbreviate badly, and it fit. Washington and Jefferson, the Presidents. I joke about that, but I mean, this team, there's nothing to joke about besides that because they had a great season and great numbers. We had their head coach on a couple of weeks ago, obviously, to discuss, the Westminster game and everything else that was coming at them. But, you look at these numbers, 400 yards per game offense, okay. Total defense, still less than 200. That's one of the best numbers, even with the loss figured in.
Absolutely.
25 points per game differential, and the turnover margin, despite the loss, is still a +4. And the Pac is a decent conference. Now, maybe they were in the easier division per se in some people's minds. There's debate about who's who and what's what with how they divided things out. But, Washington and Jefferson played strong, consistent football and had a good chance in that Westminster game in the championship. Just fell short, but you've got to take your hats off to the consistency that Washington and Jefferson presents year after year, including this spring season.
Yeah, I mean they're always in the playoff consideration and in the PAC conference championship race every year. So not surprised that they ended up here, and the fact that they really had a couple of turnovers taken away in that PAC championship game. They could have been hoisting the banner potentially, but solid season by the Presidents. That defensive number is probably, I think, the best that we have on this list, under 200 yards per game. Certainly great run for the Presidents.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to look through to see if I see a better one. You just said that. And I do not. I think 198.3, excuse me, that is going to be the best one that we have there. But we'll see as we go along. That's why we have these slides. So you'll get to see it with us as we go down the list of the top 10 here or up it, as I guess you should say. Here's a team that I think some people are going to disagree with, and I would tell you, you got to look closer at this situation. You really do. Whitworth, the Pirates of the Northwest Conference, in at number 9. I look at the scores, and I understand it's against only 2 teams in 4 games, but there's a reverse logic to this as well, folks, which is usually if you rout a team in game 1, usually they're going to know enough what to do in game 2 to beat you back or at least lessen the problem. And if they aren't able to do so, it probably means you've got a lot of talent on your team. And I think that's what we saw with Whitworth. Jaden Pruitt, their quarterback, Ethan Peliquin, and among others, is wide receivers. Offensively, this is a very good team. 400 yards per game, just about. Defense was 267.8, but the point differential at plus 29, that's one of the best that we've seen across this top 25. Turnover margin plus 4. Linfield didn't play in the Northwest Conference this season, but the one thing we've noticed over the last few years is that the depth in the Northwest Conference seems to be getting better. That Linfield isn't the automatic check mark they used to be. And the fact that Pac Lute wasn't able to really hold a candle to Whitworth in those 2 games that they played tells me that Whitworth is a strong team and is deserving to be in the top 10 at 4-0.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially what you said before with Pruitt and Peliquin, like they had some major connections, long touchdown passes throughout the spring season, very consistent. And so, it was fun to see a little bit of football in the Pacific Northwest, especially when they had some of the later start times. But solid run there by the Pirates. They'll certainly be giving Linfield a good run for their money come the fall.
We're going long as usual here, but you know what? We're having fun and we're giving you some good information along the way. So we'll end up being about an hour in the show, maybe an hour 5. But you know what? Top 25 teams who we wanted to talk about. It's like talking about favorite children at this point. I mean, that's what we're up against here. Here's one that we're losing. Favorite children are leaving us. I believe going to a different division here. Emory and Henry in at number 8. And, again, the only black mark on their record is that loss to Randolph-Macon in overtime, 13-10. And, total offense, 433.3. There's total defense at 203.8. That's probably the second best total defense that we'll see in this entire list. Their defense gave up a total of, 33 points in the 4 games. Their offense could score almost at will against certain teams. Emory and Henry at 3-1 with basically a 50-50 coin toss and an overtime play that if it went a different way, we'd be talking about them as the champions. This is a team that deserves to be number 8. The ODAC, while some people may dog it a little bit in terms of overall conference strength, showed us consistency playing as many games as they did to help us determine who's who and what's what in that conference. And showcased some talent that we might not have otherwise known existed, like this Emory and Henry team.
Yeah, and kind of what we've seen now with, what we're, let's do the math, James. Let's see, what's 18 or so teams in at this point. If you just look at their resume, over 430 yards on offense, check. Almost less than 200 yards a game on defense, check. Point differential 22, check. Turnover, they're checking off all the right boxes. And if you watch that Randolph-Macon game, there were some really talented defensive players and offensive players in that one. This is not just a run-of-the-mill D3 program. They're going D2 for a reason. And once again, when you compare it to the rest of the teams on the list, this Wasp team would probably beat a vast majority of them, and they just came up a little short on an unlucky bounce from being undefeated conference champion.
Didn't technically bounce; it just sort of sat there in midair, and Presley Egbers said to give that to me and ran it in. And the rest of the story. We use it as one of our clips to advertise this show because it was that kind of moment as spring football didn't get any better than that moment, for sure. Let's go to number 7. and a team that had a lot of fun moments. We tried to showcase some of them during the season. Hanover. Hanover is one of those teams that you look at and you're like, well, the Heartland, whatever. But this was a very consistent team, scoring over 50 points 3 times in 4 games. And then that really good battle with Rose-Hulman in game number 3 on March 27th. Their offense, 457 yards per game. The defense needed to step up a little bit better, giving up 410 yards. Point differential, though, plus 22.3. Turnover margin, plus 3. This was a team that I wish had played a 5th game, and I think that it was in the cards for them to do so, because I think it would have sort of fully justified this number 7 ranking. But, a lot of people had doubts. They thought Bluffton was going to take them down. Bluffton did in a really thrilling game. Don't forget, 51-44 is not a lie. That was a back-and-forth game. But, a team that everybody thought was going to slip, they never did. And their offense showed the ability to score points in droves.
Yeah, and I think, the one ding, I guess you could say, to Hanover is when you look at their, sort of the total defense, that's pretty high as far as yardage allowed for a team to be this highly ranked. But one of those things, it's just kind of there weren't that many 4 and 5-0 teams in the spring. So if you're in that company and you're effectively winning conference titles, that's obviously going to give you a boost. Whereas if you were just kind of in an average fall season, you'd be probably in the top something, getting an automatic qualifier, but certainly not as high as this. But in this case, though, certainly deserving, and they won the games that they needed to, and they're still the team to beat in the Heartland.
Speaking of 4-0, 5-0 teams, I think you're going to see a little bit of a trend here, although maybe not entirely. Maybe there is a one-loss team mid the top 6 here. We'll see how it pans out, but it won't be number 6. As that team was 5-0, Randolph-Macon. We just spoke a little bit about them when we talked about Emory and Henry, the lucky roll in the air, and Egbers taking it down for the touchdown in overtime in the ODAC championship. But you can't just focus on that one game when you're talking about them, and for good reason. I mean, 44-0 against Guilford, 28-0 against Hampton-Sydney. The defense stood up in some very key times. The first game of the season, when everybody's kind of new and fresh, and with the entire playbook, that is, defensively especially, and being able to shut out a team in that first game, it's a very good thing. Shutting out your constant rival is a huge thing. You don't usually get to do that. Yeah. And so 241 yards per game is very good total defense-wise. Point differential plus 20. Turnover margin plus 2. There's a reason why the computer and we put them as close as we all did with Emory and Henry, though. The closeness of that game obviously does not create separation, and Emory and Henry's stats still showed some pretty good strength compared to Randolph-Macon, but Randolph-Macon won the game, and so they deserve to be higher here at number 6.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what we saw with the Yellow Jackets all season was a really consistent, strong, solid team that could beat you with defense, that can beat you with running and throwing the ball. So I would expect, especially now that Emory and Henry has left, that Randolph-Macon is going to be a favorite in the ODAC race and a potential playoff team come the end of 2021.
Let's go to number 5, another 5-0 team, another conference champion, and that is the Westminster Titans of Pennsylvania. This is a team that not many people expected to do this season. Let's be honest here. They thought Grove City would get in their way. They beat Grove City in a close one. They thought Carnegie Mellon might trip them up. They beat Carnegie Mellon by 10. They thought Washington Jefferson for sure would beat them in that championship game. Did not happen. So against all odds, it felt like at times. Their stats maybe not as strong as some people would want to see, but look at the turnover margin at plus 8. That tells you again, ball hawks that they were defensively, and in a good conference. They deserve to be number 5. And we kind of got closer with them with Cole Konechka, who was in our In Their Own Words segment as well earlier. Just learning a little bit more about that team. You got to love the heart of that team and their fan base and Coach Benzel and everybody. You can tell why they have turned a certain corner on this whole thing and seem to be almost the team to beat, I'd call them, in the fall right now. With all deference to Case Western Reserve, this team seems to be gelling, and this spring season is a big part of that.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why the Titans will be viewed as the favorites, especially with this new offense that they've been able to test out and really run to a lot of effectiveness and efficiency. That's going to change the landscape a little bit in the pack this fall. So it should be interesting to see, if the Titans kind of just reload off of this very successful spring run, or if there'll be some other teams, Case, like you mentioned, who will try to trip them up along the way.
Well, we have 21 teams down, one page left. I've got 4 teams on one page right now that I'm going to read from, and these are the best of the best. I'm going to tell you one thing, though, folks, and JB and I were talking about this earlier. We did not readjust things when we looked at it. Teams number 4, 5, and 6 were razor thin with the margins, with our votes, and everything else. I think one of the things that did help determine or distinguish was not just the teams that played in those positions, but overall the depth of the conference during the spring. For instance, the ODAC, decently deep, but not the deepest conference out there, we didn't think. There were some definite holes there that maybe made the games a little bit inconsistent. The Pac seemed to have a little bit more depth, especially on Westminster's side of the ledger, it felt like at times. And so they were a decently deep conference. The SAA, we mentioned it earlier, the overall depth of talent in the SAA that's played this spring seemed to be one of the deepest, alongside the ASC probably, and some of the OAC as well. The OAC has that, imbalance too. Some people want to spot that, hey, you've got a couple of good teams every year, Mount Union plus maybe 1 or 2 others, and then who else? But the SAA from top to bottom just seemed like a super competitive, deep, and talented conference. That's why number 4 is Barry. Their numbers don't necessarily check out fully across the board. The total offense, 366.8. Total defense, 301.3. Point differential, only 13. But again, turnover margin, it's +6 with just 4 games. Good ball hawks. Birmingham Southern was no pushover this season, it seemed like. And that was a close game for them. Center was no pushover. The Hendricks game was close. This was a team that has a lot of talent on it that found the way to win multiple times. And again, the depth and just even getting to watch some of those games from start to finish, you could feel that this team really belonged in a conversation like this. Maybe they should be number 5. Maybe they should be number 6 in some people's eyes. But as much as it's a tribute to Barry, it's a tribute also to the SAA right now, I'd say, that they are number 4.
Yeah, and I think part of their track record of having consistently won that conference for a few years in a row now, and just the plays like we saw in the SAA title game from Little Rock, the 3 interceptions, including the pick 6. It was just one of those teams that they found ways to win games. Even if it came to a special teams error. They still made stuff happen and won a lot of close calls, and that's a sign of a championship culture and a championship team.
Absolutely, and Coach K deserves a lot of credit for what he's done in creating that atmosphere of winning and culture of winning for Barry down there. But again, there are a lot of teams nipping at their heels right now and ready to knock them off in the fall. While they may be the favorite coming into the fall, I got to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't win it because of these other teams in the depth that we're seeing right now. Again, this is the spring 2021 top 25, not the preseason fall 2021 top 25. So we are basing it on what we've seen on the field and the teams that we watched, from start to finish in this since February. That's why they're number 4. No apologies for that. No apologies for who's number 3 here. It's the only team that you're going to see in the top 5 with a loss. But let's face it, it was a close game. It's a conference with a lot of talent. I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that Hardin-Simmons is number 3 at 4-1. They were consistently winning by large margins to start the season to get into the ASC championship game. You know the story of the loss against UMHB, the 23-15 game that was back and forth a little bit toward the end of it at least. UMHB started hot in the first half, and Hardin-Simmons was still in the conversation in the second half and had a chance to even tie the game late, but could not get there. 500-plus yards per game on offense, about 250 for defense, which is decent, not the best, but decent. 26-point differential, including the loss, don't forget. So, I mean, that actually, I said earlier, we had seen one of the best point differentials. You're seeing some even better point differentials here with a team like Hardin-Simmons in our final 2 coming up after this. Turnover margin +2, although the UMHB game, I think, tempered that number for them. Look, they were your 1A and your 1B throughout the season in the ASC, and the championship game didn't necessarily change that feeling. I think that Hardin-Simmons is a team that, if they can get over the UMHB hump, can make a playoff run next season or whenever. They've got the ability, the recruits, the backing to do it. Now it's just a question of getting over that hump of UMHB.
Yeah, because, I mean, honestly, I thought that they looked way better on film and in their games than the Crusaders did in many respects leading up to that game. And so I was kind of surprised at the result, to be honest. And, you know, I ate a little crow with my picking the Cowboys. But, yeah, I think if they can get over that sort of mental block that for some reason when they play UMHB, they kind of seem to fall apart in certain aspects of the game. That I mean they can play with pretty much anybody in the nation. They've got the roster and the coaching staff to do it. It's just going to be a matter of trying to figure out a way to take care of their rivals, who also happen to be one of the best teams of all D3.
Yeah, minor point, obviously. Speaking of that
minor
team,
detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of that team and another team that we have not named yet, obviously it's Mount Union or Mary Hardin-Baylor up next. Who is it? First, we put a poll out. This had no effect on who we picked. We had already made our decision. The computer already had fed us the information to verify it. I will tell you that the decision was unanimous between us and the computer on the ordering of 1, 2, and 3, ultimately. There's that for you at least. But I will tell you that the poll suggested by a somewhat narrow margin that Mount Union should be number 1, according to the fans out there. Not a huge sample set. We had a lot of traffic of other stuff going on during that time, so that's why it probably got overshadowed. But there was a group out there that was definitely pro Mount Union at number 1. So who's number 2? It is indeed Mary Hardin-Baylor. It's not their defense. Defense 250 a game. Decent. Yeah. The offense at 387 was rather pedestrian for a team that's a top-tier team. Obviously, point differential was good at 28.2. There were ball hawks in defense at +6. Offensively, it became Jekyll and Hyde. The East Texas Baptist game obviously was a disappointment in the offensive column. They felt they should score more in that type of game. But the Louisiana College score at 65-20, and that developed especially late in the second half. It was a somewhat close game early on against Louisiana College. That showed their other side. They're still trying to figure out who they are offensively. Kyle King is a good asset for them, I think, as quarterback. Tommy Bowden, maybe they'll find some other uses for him, or who knows what's in the future for him. But I think ultimately, when you're measuring the best of the best, you have to have all 3 facets of the game down. Offense was still the concern no matter what, no matter how you sliced it with Mary Hardin-Baylor. And so they finished at number 2 this time around compared to Mount Union in our view and the computer's view.
Yeah, and even though it didn't factor into the equation, if you just looked at some of the basic, pass completion stats for Mary Hardin-Baylor, it tells you a lot. The quarterback struggles were there from day one. They've been kind of there for a while. I think once they get what they figure out what they're trying to do from an RPO perspective and do a better job of distributing the ball to these really talented wide receivers that can break games open big time. They just need a little more consistency in the passing game. The offensive line came together great. That was pretty much the number one reason why they beat Hardin Simmons in the title game. They just won the battle up front. And so I'm pretty sure we'll be looking at the Crusaders as a national championship contender as we do every year coming into the fall.
Leaves one team, and I think it's pretty clear who it is. So let's talk about number one in our first ever top 25 this for the spring 2021 season, the Mount Union Purple Raiders. 4-0 because of the cancellation of the game against Baldwin Wallace. But the scores, except for the kind of anomalous Marietta game, which was only 20 points scored by them, 50-plus in the three other games. Mount Union was Mount Union, okay? Let's face it. Defense maybe you would think would be able to tamp down into single digits at least one more time, but once these games start going a little haywire, defenses start to let up a little bit. They gave up 251 yards per game, which was not the best in the nation, but it was good. The offense, though, 543.8. I believe that is the absolute top, if not second. I believe that was the number one, though. Point differential, plus 32. That is tops. And turnover margin in 4 games is a plus 5. Coach Dart, not missing a beat to a certain degree. I think they needed a game. As much as Mary Hardin Baylor needed a season like this to tell who they were, to figure out offensively where they're going or need to go, I think they needed a game like the Marietta game in this spring season, Mount Union, to tell their team, we still have some growing to do here under this new helmsman of Coach Dart. I think they learned a little bit about themselves, and when you're a team like Mount Union, to be able to say you learned something in this 4-game set that they played, I think it's important if you're going to go out there and compete for another national championship come fall 2021.
Yeah, and going from Mary Hardin Baylor, where there is a little bit of a quarterback issue, well, the one thing that we definitely learned in 2021 in the spring is that Braxton Plunk is probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country, period. He was really impressive in the spring, threw for, I think, almost 1,000 yards and had some really big games. And so obviously the heir apparent to D'Angelo Fulford, who I believe is now going to be giving it a whirl in the Canadian Football League. Plunk is a guy who's going to become a household name for Division III football fans, especially this fall.
JB, that's our top 25. Let me review it briefly here with team, record, and conference to give them a little bit of an extra bow here. Number 25 from the USA South, Huntingdon at 3-1. Number 24 from the ASC, East Texas Baptist at 3-2. Number 23 from the MIAA, Albion at 3-0. Number 22 from the NACC, Aurora at 3-0. Number 21 from the CCIW, Carthage at 2-0. Number 20 from the NCAC, DePaul at 2-0. Number 19 from the NJAC, Montclair State at 2-1. Number 18 from the Midwest Conference, Lake Forest at 3-0. Number 17 from the NJAC, Wesley at 2-1. Number 16 from the NACC, Lakeland at 3-0. Number 15, Brevard from the USA South at 4-1. Number 14 from the SAA, Hendricks at 3-1. Number 13 from the ODAC, Hampton-Sydney at 4-1. Number 12 from the NJAC, Salisbury at 2-0. Number 11 from the OAC, Heidelberg at 4-1. And now for the top 10. At number 10 from the PAC, Washington and Jefferson at 3-1. Number 9 from the Northwest Conference, Whitworth at 4-0. Number 8 from the ODAC, Emory and Henry at 3-1. Number 7 from the Heartland Conference, Hanover at 4-0. At number 6 from the ODAC, Randolph-Macon at 5-0. Number 5 from the PAC, Westminster of Pennsylvania at 5-0. Number 4 from the SAA, Barry at 4-0. Number 3 from the ASC, Hardin-Simmons at 4-1. Number 2 also from the ASC, Mary Hardin-Baylor at 5-0. And number 1 from the Ohio Athletic Conference, Mount Union at 4-0. Congratulations to all these teams, but honestly, congratulations to all 100-plus teams that played at least one game that counted in the spring season. The 59 of you that finished 1-1 or better, playing at least 2 games and finishing 500-plus. Congratulations to you on that success level. But just playing one play of organized college football this spring in Division III was important, not just to you, but to us, and we thank you for that. Up next, over the next week or so, we will be handing out some other awards on Twitter in a less organized fashion than this show on Facebook. We'll be handing out some Players of the Year awards. We're not doing a full-scale All-America team. That's D3Football.com's job, and they'll be doing that. But we will be giving out some more accolades beyond just Coach of the Year, which we already talked about, which is Chip Knapp. Congratulations to him, despite the circumstances. Final word goes to you, my friend.
Well, just thank you, because I definitely couldn't have done that by myself. It was I don't know if people realize, and I'm sure that this poll will get torn to shreds in certain places, and it'll be pinned on the wall and applauded in others. But just so you know, and darts will be definitely thrown at it. But there were a lot of hours and a lot of time and effort put into trying to look at these very disparate, types of teams in different parts of the country and try to pull something together that ranked them in a way that was a little bit scientific, but allowed for the eye test, as Frank alluded to early. And it was really fun. The best part of the spring football, after not having any in the fall, save for the Secretary's Cup and a handful of other games, was that we just got to enjoy being football fans again and being able to, appreciate and give some recognition to these young student athletes and coaching staffs out there that have worked probably harder than they've ever had to in their careers just to get on the field. So hopefully you enjoyed this as much as we did, and we thank you guys for at least humoring us with our little spring top 25 list here.
Folks, we'll see you on Twitter for the other accolades, and we'll be back before August, obviously, with some more summary type show and whatnot. Obviously, news will break along the way, and we'll review the last 14 months overall at a certain point in time in the not-too-distant future. Until then, be well, and thanks for joining us.